Headline edition, July 8, 1947. The Army Air Forces has announced that a flying disc has been found and is now in the possession of the Army.
However, there have been a certain percentage of this volume of reports that have been made by credible observers of relatively incredible things.
2, 1, 0, all engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff. 32 minutes past the hour. Liftoff on Apollo 11. Tower clear.
But other sightings apparently were taken more seriously.
And one in particular, an incident called the Rendlesham Forest Incident, also known as Britain's Roswell. This was in 1980, shortly after Christmas, when a few American airmen who were stationed in the UK reported seeing a UFO.
A huge, solid, diamond-shaped object they described as 100 foot long, hovering silently in the sky above them.
There is very compelling evidence that we may not be alone, whatever that means.
American public and global public finally understands UFOs are real. This is a technology that is so far beyond anything that we have.
Reportedly appear to exhibit unusual flight characteristics, appear to demonstrate advanced technology.
Arrow is the culmination of decades of DoD, intelligence community, and congressionally directed efforts to successfully resolve UAP encountered first and foremost by U.S. military.
Welcome back to Disclosure Team with me, your host, Vinny Adams. The following is an interview with Melissa Tittl. Melissa is the creative CEO at Hathor Studios, and today we'll be discussing their latest documentary, Code 12. We'll also talk about Melissa's extensive work in TV, such as her appearance alongside Ben Hansen in the popular series UFO Witness. I hope you enjoy this interview with Melissa. Thank you. So Melissa, thank you so much for joining me today. How are you?
Awesome. Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. I thought we'd just start by kind of going back and sort of, if you could just sort of tell me where your interests in the kind of esoteric, ancient history and UFO subjects really started.
Wow. I mean, I have a boring answer, but it's
okay.
slightly interesting. I think ever since I was a little girl, I thought to myself, there's just something else going on here. I mean, the adults seem to live in a world that just doesn't seem to compute with the idea of what they're saying the world is. And, maybe that made my imagination go, but I always, since an early age, I thought there's gotta be something else going on here. This just doesn't seem like this is the trajectory of life and that's it type of thing. And, when I got older, my interest definitely when I was in Hollywood for TV and film, I found myself in productions that were just my nerd hobby, right? Like doing the Universe, which was strictly quantum physics and a space show with NASA. And then finding myself working for Paramount Studios on Mission Impossible and Star Wars and Star Trek and all that kind of stuff, right? Which is pretty cool. I didn't have an experience that said, this is the moment when I thought we're not alone. I had felt this way ever since I was younger. I just felt that there was other things there all the time. And I guess I could be explained now as somebody who's sensitive or has some kind of intuition. I would pick up things all the time, whether it was ghosts or aliens or whatever it was, but I never saw anything. I just knew that there was something else out there. From a journalistic standpoint, I don't have any evidence of when that started. But that's been such a big part of my life and then spending the rest of my life as a journalist, as a writer, as a producer, really trying to figure that out and analyze that.
Yeah. I can relate to that an awful lot, actually. I myself haven't had any kind of sighting or anything, but again, like you said, was very curious from a young age that there's got to be more to this, and that's, you know, how I kind of progressed through my 20s, 30s, and into my 40s. So yeah, definitely relate to that. So how did you kind of break away from that Hollywood sort of scene into this subject when it comes to producing and appearing in kind of TV shows and documentaries?
So I left Los Angeles to become head of content at Gaia. So I moved to Colorado. And the funny thing was, in my early 20s, I did some on-camera work. So I had hosted some things. I had, you know, I've been on camera. And then it was all of a sudden I moved to Colorado, and I'm like, okay, that part of my life is done. And I really started diving into the space even more. And then I found myself on camera because I actually was writing most of the stuff. And there wasn't many women. I mean, there's Linda Moulton Howe and there's some other women, but at the time there really wasn't anybody talking about this. And I was so deep into it. They're like, can you just get on camera and talk about it? I did one show, Hangar One, which was a History Channel show, and that was right before I left. And the only reason I was on camera was because I was writing the show. I knew all the cases. I had studied all the MUFON cases. I went and met with some of the witnesses, and I was fully involved with how we were developing the show. And they said, could you just get in front of the camera and talk about it, because you actually know all the things. So it wasn't my goal to be in front of the camera at all. I had given that up completely. I love writing. I love producing. And you know, I can eat more, so it's great. I don't have to worry about what I look like.
That's fascinating. No, I mean, you mentioned there that Hangar One, and you were familiar with all the cases. Were there any cases that really stood out in that you think are really compelling?
I was drawn to the cases during war, because there's always there's been a couple of videos and they've been deleted during the Iraqi war. American soldiers had posted some weird lights in the sky, and they're deleted now. They can't even find them. I don't even know who the people are. I tried to track them down because I wanted to do a story on it, but I uncovered some really crazy stuff that happened during the Vietnam War in these MUFON cases that I had never heard before. There's actually a ally ship that was blown up. It was an Australian ship that was aiding Americans in Vietnam, and they blame the Americans, and the Americans are like, no, it was an unknown object. And then they, of course, they didn't say it was a UFO, but they said, it must have been the North Vietnamese, but the North Vietnamese had tunnels. They didn't even have tanks or planes or anything like that. So then it was the thought maybe it was a Russian. But they actually labeled it as a UFO, like something had come in and was interacting with these ships and blew up an ally ship, and some Australians had died, and they couldn't figure out who it was, but there was all these strange lights in the sky and all these weird things that were happening. And then there was a couple cases where there was a crash. There was one that was a crash, and it was the beams were almost like invisible, like Predator.
Wow.
And I thought to myself, I wonder if this is where they got the idea from for the movie. But yeah, I had never heard of any of these cases in Vietnam, but all these soldiers kind of reported these weird, they didn't see any creatures, but they were definitely talking about these kind of jelly-like simulated kind of beings and then these weird crafts and lights in the sky.
Wow.
I'd never heard that before.
No, I'm not familiar with those. Are they all documented as well in MUFON case files?
They are in the MUFON case files, and we covered a couple of them in Hangar One, and I was so obsessed with that because I had just never heard of anything like that before. I just thought it was so fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, I know I've seen the episode probably a while back, so I'm going to have to dig back into that because that sounds really interesting. Thank you. So let's talk about this new film, Code 12. Absolutely brilliant, wonderful, really enjoyed it, and so many things to kind of dig into in it. It's filled with just wonderful research and investigation. So can you just talk about how it came about, how long it took, and the kind of premise behind it all?
Oh God, this has taken me 10 years. So as I kind of started out with this interview saying, I just knew there was something else going on. When I started producing shows like Ancient Aliens, even the quantum physicist type shows I was working on, there was something that connected all of these stories, and I couldn't figure it out. And when I worked at Ancient Aliens, of course, the big premise is that, when in doubt, insert aliens. This happened. How did this happen? It seems like it's similar. Insert aliens, right? But there was something else that I couldn't put my finger on that was happening. And so, I've had the privilege of not only producing ancient civilization shows, alien shows, science shows, history shows, but there's esoteric type stuff because I was at Gaia for so long. There just was something else going on. And we were all looking, like everyone has their research of silos, whether they're looking at DNA or they're looking at esoteric symbols or sacred geometry. And people get really passionate about that. And all of that is amazing. But to me, there seemed to be something communicating between all these sectors of the unknown. And that is really what drove this research, that there was this something else. And that's really what Code 12 is about. 10 years of my research kind of compiled into 90 minutes, which is super intense. So I apologize. I'm hoping that I can do a series so I could just dive into each of these sectors. But to me, what it really started to represent was not that one, that all of these were connected by one being per se, but that it was more part of a simulation that we are part of. And I know that's a big topic right now. And there's a lot of people in different levels of craft talking about that. But for me, all these ancient texts, religious texts, temple structures, esoteric symbols, biology, quantum physics, everything is kind of communicating in the same way. And I think our goal is to kind of figure out that it exists and go beyond it. And that's the next level of humanity.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, like you said there, that people always throw in the alien thing if they kind of can't fit another puzzle piece in there. But I've always thought that surely there's the potential that there was a previously advanced technical civilization that we just don't know about. Is that something that you may consider as a viable theory?
Definitely. If you follow Nick Bostrom, he's a big component of the simulation theory, the matrix, if you will. He's a philosopher for Oxford. He goes into the premise of the ancestor simulation. So if you think of the universe kind of being like a Russian doll, right, where there's just, it just keeps multiplying inside of itself, and one of the goals of a simulated being is then to create a simulation so that it keeps propagating itself and continuing. But where it comes from is that theory of the ancestor simulation. So there's an ancestor that then created us, and then we're creating simulated beings, which is happening. And look at video games and how we're progressing in the AI world. That's why this is becoming more of a probability for a lot of people, scientists especially. So one of the things that I interviewed Michio Kaku last year, and I talk to him often. I'm a big fan of his work. He's a quantum physicist. He talks about how the universe is filled with these bubbles, and where they come from. Of course, they'll go back to the Big Bang Theory, but they come from the universe kind of turns into all these bubbles of existence. And if you think about that, that kind of fits into the simulation theory. Like if the universe creates all these different bubbles, well, then each bubble is its own coded simulation of how it works, what biological objects exist there, how it runs. I mean, so if you think about us as humans, everything that's on this planet, even aliens, they would be all part of the same simulation if we are living in this one bubble that exists in the universe.
Yeah, absolutely. But then it begs the question, who created
all
of that? Yeah.
Right. And, I have a strange theory in Code 12, kind of going back to Egyptian times of Thoth, kind of saying he's the architect of the Great Pyramid. He's the architect of this. He doesn't say simulation, of course, but he says this, this frequency of the planet. Right. But where is he from? So is he part of something else that came here to create the simulation? I mean, anybody can debate that, but that's an interesting ancient understanding of his role in humanity today.
Yeah, and you mentioned the Great Pyramid there, and I know you speak with Billy Carson about Thoth as well, and the Emerald tablets, and it seems to claim that the pyramid is multifunctioning. Can you just sort of talk us a bit about those theories?
Yeah, I mean, the Great Pyramid has many different functions depending on who you talk to, but it seems to be, I would say the consensus is that there's something that the Great Pyramid is constantly giving off, some kind of frequency. I mean, and what that is, I think we're learning more and more about. I mean, I think Robert Grant has a new theory coming out that it plays these musical notes, that there's all this evidence of these different frequencies that then create some kind of musical understanding. But I would say when it comes to being multifunctional, it feels more like a device and less of a hey, we built this and it's really great and you're never going to figure out how we did it, and here's a bunch of calculations that measure the moon and the Earth's distance and all this kind of stuff. You know, every year somebody comes out with a new calculation they found. You're like, wow, that's pretty amazing. So you have to think, why would they do that unless it actually is a calculation? It's like a device that is used with that calculation. And I think that's more the consensus now, that we're not sure what it's doing exactly, but it's it's almost like a machine emitting some kind of frequency.
Yeah, I think, and it seems strange that, it's not just a pyramid, but there's a lot of kind of ancient structures that seem to be placed in specific locations, and maybe something to do with the earth energies around that as well. Do you think there is some link there, and that could potentially have an actual purpose?
You mean that it's built on a certain kind of ley line, or yeah, for sure. And we don't know if this is what Thoth's role was, but this is, of course, according to the Emerald tablets. But if I was a person who said, okay, I'm going to take this planet, this planet, and create a different simulation than the rest of the universe. So we're coming up with probabilities here, but I would find all the nodes. I would figure out all the nodes of the planet and how I could then activate them and control them, and then create a different interdimensional reality. I mean, when people talk about the fall of Atlantis, the idea of the fall of Atlantis is not that it just fell into the ocean, but that it came from another dimension and fell down to this third dimensional level where we are living in today. But at one point, the Earth and its beings were at a different dimensional level of existence. So the idea is that these ancient sites were built in certain places that are sacred, but also hold a certain frequency and can communicate with each other, and for good or bad, who's ever controlling it.
Yeah, and do you think that could sort of answer the question why there were certain, civilizations in, say, South America with so many similarities to cultures and that around the world, where there's no way that they could have met and shared ideas, but that they were communicating over kind of vast distances?
Yeah, I love that theory. But then what makes more sense is maybe that if somebody set the morphogenic field, right? Like the morphogenic field, this is something I talk about in the documentary about the 100th monkey theory.
Yeah.
That they discovered in monkeys, which was, island monkeys are doing one thing, and then all of a sudden, like that, monkeys on the mainland are doing the same thing, this washing of sweet potatoes. It's not that one came over on a boat and was like, hey, this is a better way to eat your sweet potato. It was something in the field, something in the consciousness, the morphogenic field. And if you make the idea that this is a living biological being on the planet that's communicating that way, then that would be the same probably for us. And for some reason, somebody set the morphogenic field to understand these symbols, to build these structures that had no idea. I think that didn't really know each other, but understood this sacred information they were taking down from the field and building these structures to do the same thing, to emit the same frequency, to be in touch with the same thing. Because all of our creation stories are the same. It doesn't matter what spirituality or that you practice, or religion, its origins a lot of them have the same kind of creation stories. So either everybody knew each other or they're taking that down from the field.
Yeah, that's interesting because we often hear about this consciousness connection within the UFO subject and other sort of areas as well. And it seems that maybe ancient people were fully aware of that consciousness field and how to manipulate it or use it, and maybe it's just something that we lost over time. Do you think that that's viable as well?
I think that we're constantly being inundated with thoughts that that we're not consciously meditating and trying to figure out what the field's trying to tell us. I think the field is constantly influencing our thoughts. I mean, one of the biggest things to do when you're in a meditation or you're taking a retreat is always the first thing you're doing is, where are those thoughts coming from? Are they my thoughts? Are they actually how I feel? Or are they thoughts that something's placing in my head? This is something the US government has been playing with since the 1950s with, how can we put thoughts in people's heads, right? They were talking about that in the 50s, right? And that's from a human standpoint. So if we're talking about something much more advanced to us than whether it's be aliens or a simulation that's constantly communicating with us, you really have to sit with yourself long enough to say, okay, wait, did I come up with that? Or is that something that is part of the field or something putting thoughts in my head? And that's kind of scary to think about if you really, really think about that, whether it's extraterrestrials, this simulation, or a government entity putting thoughts in your head. I think the most valuable information is know thyself. And that couldn't be true even 2,000 years later.
No, absolutely. I find that absolutely fascinating. I mean, it really baffles the mind a little bit, but it's certainly worth thinking about. Could you just talk about the importance of the golden ratio? Because, I mean, that just seems to crop up time and time again in relation to so many different things. And, could you just talk about how it could relate to all this and what it actually means?
So the golden ratio, according to most people's research, remember, I've got that 100-foot view because I'm coming in as looking at everybody's research instead of just one person's or something that follows how I think, right? I'm looking at this from above. I would say most people and most understanding of the golden ratio, everything seems to be built on the golden ratio, whether it's fractals, it's the fractalization of everything in our biological matter to everything that's like not biological, right? Everything that the building structures of temples and these spots that we were talking about, our bodies, like everything, right? The golden ratio. The universe, if mapped out, the golden ratio. But then I would say if we live in a simulation, then wouldn't the golden ratio be part of some kind of code that defines us in this space and time? And that's not a bad thing, but I would say then something else is beyond the existence of the golden ratio being how everything's calculated. And I think that what I try to accomplish in Code 12 is to prove that beyond what we know, even in esoteric circles, there is something else that exists right in front of us all the time that's beyond the golden ratio, that there's another code that runs everything. We just aren't programmed in it, but we can program ourselves to be part of that. And I think that's really interesting. And that's where the lotus flower, the instead of the eternal lotus flower, instead of the other symbol. I'm just, my head's blanking. The structure, like you have the structure of like Gaia, right? That's
Sure.
like this, that's like sacred geometry that's kind of gets into the golden ratio. But then you have the eternal lotus flower, which is a Taurus, and that's something else. That's going beyond the other sacred geometry structure. So sacred geometry is small and big, right? So think about it. Like, it's not, we are living in this code, but there's something else beyond it. And I think now we're all like, okay, the golden ratio, everything seems to line up. Okay, so what's beyond it? What's beyond how everything else has been programmed?
And If there's this big code that kind of does link everything and kind of connect things, then how do we even go about breaking the code or understanding the code? I mean, or are we just not meant to? Are we just meant to kind of experience it?
Whew, that's a good question. I mean, I'm still in this code, right? I think it's a multifaceted thing. In this code, I mean, it's called code 12 because we're dealing with a code that equals 12. But in sacred geometry, we have a dodecahedron, which is 12 points. In the middle is 13. And how space propagates itself through that dodecahedron that shape is through that 13th point. So in through and then comes out through another dodecahedron, and then it keeps growing and growing and growing. We have that idea of the simulation keeping propagating. So if you think of that philosophy, if you just take that from a quantum physics standpoint, and you think of that of yourself, right? Which this gets into new age stuff, but to really get in touch with that other code, you must go within. You have to clear those thoughts and be able to get in touch with something else beyond what has been programmed for you, for your existence, everything around you. And but then that's a mixture of then understanding how the universe works. So there's two parts, right? There's this is what the ancient text, the temples, all spirituality, it's laden in, and all of it is, yes, you need to understand yourself. But if you understand how the universe works, if you are able to quiet your thoughts enough to move past the program and understand how matter, time and space, how all of it works. And this is the exciting things that are happening in mainstream science today. They are debating what matter is, I would say, in the last 5 years. And I would say in this last year, it's been insane. For the first time, we're debating what is matter. That's amazing. So mixed with understanding how the universe works, you can move past that code. Once you've figured out that this is one code and I can go to another one, humans have the ability to traverse space and time. And that is what those temples are all about. That is what the understanding even of extraterrestrials existing. The fact that something can come in and out of your existence like that is a reminder that you can do the same thing. We're just locked in the program. And all of this unknown stuff that you talk about in your podcast that exists for a lot of you that are listening to this and are interested in it, whether it's mystery school teachings, extraterrestrials, ancient civilizations, any of the unknowns, even quantum physics, all of that is reminding you that there is something else out there, and we're all trying to crack that code. And it's really what I try to do in this is show people what that is so they can start to wrap their mind around it. And we can all, as a human race, go beyond this. We can communicate with extraterrestrials in a way that we have more control, which is the fear, right? Whether they're good or bad, we need to have control over our existence beyond our program.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you spoke to so many different experts in various fields in this documentary, and now that it's out and you've kind of finished it, does it still leave you wanting to learn more, or is there another direction you can go in with all of this for another production?
Well, because there's so much stuff in that documentary, I really want to do a series so that I can let it breathe a little bit. So I apologize if you guys are watching it. I mean, I would love for you to watch it, but when you do, remember there's a lot of information. Watch it a couple times. But even when I finished the film, I like would come across something I was reading. I'm like, oh my God, yes. And then there's this, right? And then there's this discovery, and then there's the 13th day of Shiva, which connects to the code, the 12. There's just so much that I started doing a short series I'm going to do on YouTube, starting tomorrow, actually, Friday, or today. Where I just do 8 minutes, and I'm like, have you ever thought about the 12 apostles and how that correlates to that story of the 12 apostles? Makes sense with this idea of this code 12, because there's just so many little things that we've heard in mythology or ancient stories, or even just things around us that we've just never thought of, then I'm saying, hey, this is kind of weird. Check it out.
Excellent. I mean, like I said, there's so much to dig into. I highly recommend everybody go and watch it. And if it's all right, I'd just like to play the trailer for it now, if that's okay.
Yes, yes.
Excellent. Bear with me. I'll share my screen.
There's only one symbol that has haunted me since I was a child. A dream that has turned into an obsession. Something is trying to get us to put the puzzle together. They have laid out codes everywhere to understand it.
This goes back centuries. There may have been some type of relic or landmark left behind.
The Great Pyramid was a power generator. It was a device that would literally alter the frequency of the planet.
The Ark of the Covenant, it functioned as a conduit between Earth and the field.
The zodiac is actually a clock, and right now that clock is broken. We can't read it.
The machine we live in has its own built-in mechanism to take over. So if you don't take over, it will take over.
Eternal or eternal life. That is connected to the base 12 source code. Why was it shifted over to base 10?
My goal is to uncover the lost technology, activate the hub, and reset the simulation to make it easier for the human expansion. Of course, if the simulation doesn't get in my way.
Ah, there we go. And I will be putting the link to the in the description where people can go and rent that and check it out. I highly recommend it. It is very, very thought-provoking. So yeah, I wanted to move on now, if it's okay, because you've done a lot of UFO based work, and I really enjoyed you with Ben Hansen, who I got to spend some time with in the summer actually, on with UFO Witness. So I guess my first question, if I can find it, you mentioned actually previous about whether these beings are good or bad. You've spoken to experiences, and are there any particular experience or cases that you've been investigating that stand out that may point to them being malevolent or specifically benevolent in any particular, either or?
Specifically for UFO Witness, I think I really applaud Discovery Plus and Travel for attempting to cover abduction stories. I mean, that's just something that we were not allowed to ever do. Even in Ancient Aliens, there was some really crazy stories in ancient times of being abducted by strange creatures, but those are just horrifying. There's not one part of me that thinks to myself, this is definitely a positive experience. And the worst part for me, I think, when I hear their testimony is if it's been going on for a long time, if they've been abducted several times throughout their childhood, they come back when they're adults. They have like Stockholm syndrome, where they've kind of identified now with their abductor, and saying, they tell them that they're really important for the progression of humanity and the saving of the planet. And that could be all true. But it feels that was such a horrific thing that happened to you, and then it's for a positive reason. It's mind-blowing to hear those testimonials, because there's some I've heard a lot of abduction stories, and the ones that we covered in our show, and some of the ones that I've done outside of UFO Witness that I've taken the time to do, there's something that definitely supernatural happened to these people. It was beyond something human that had happened to them, because it just was too crazy. They were too I don't know how to say it as an investigative journalist. There's just a point where you have exalted all of your trigger points of, is this person telling me the truth or not? And when you actually reach someone that you think to yourself, something's really happened to this person, because they're still kind of scared. And then when they come back and they say, it's for the good of the planet. I mean, as a human, I guess, how would you explain that situation? No one's been able to explain why people are being abducted. accept that it might be a good thing. I mean, this is what we do in our human mind. We have to come up for a reason for something. It's kind of heartbreaking for me, to be honest with you. But that to me doesn't seem positive. It just doesn't. I mean, the positive experience I can talk about with people in contact with alien beings. I would they get visited. They are healed. I've heard of a couple stories where somebody didn't even know that they were sick, and they had gone in for a test that night. Some kind of being, energy looking being, came down and put their hands, or their, whatever, the being put their hands on the body of this person, and they had like some kind of cancer, and healed them, and then left. And they never, I mean, it was clearly not human. It wasn't a gray alien. It was something else. Of course, I think in their head they thought, an angel had come and visited them and healed them, type of thing. And then they got the test results later, and they had cancer, and then they went back, and nothing was in their body after this experience. So there's positive experiences, some kind of interdimensional connection that people have with beings, whether they're negative or positive. Of course, Ben and I have done a lot of research as far as DNA. Is there a connection with Rh negative? There seems to be some kind of connection there. I think there needs to be more data, but it's a very interesting theory. But this is why I can't get on the camp of everything's great, like all aliens are amazing, or all aliens are bad. I can't commit to one camp or the other. I think that we're dealing with something, as I said earlier, that we can't control. And as humans, we need to be able to understand how this all works, so that we can practice free will within something that understands how the universe works, and we don't.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, what gets me is that we hear stories of so many different types of beings, whether they are biological entities, the Greys or the Nordics and mantis beings, but then we hear about light beings and shadow beings. So do you think this could be, literally just a multi, many different races, or do you think we're dealing with something so far outside of what we can comprehend that could be just masking itself and appearing as different things? It's the speculation, I suppose, can go on and on, but do you kind of have any kind of favorite theories about the origin of a non-human intelligence? Is it extraterrestrial, or is it multidimensional, or something that even has just existed on this planet way before us?
Yeah, that's a really great question. All right, so I'll say my favorite theory, and I'll say this because the reason why I like this theory the most is because it seems to have attracted the attention of mainstream science, people that are not into aliens. People that are like, I never want to talk about this, but if I had to, scientists, mainstream scientists, if I had to talk about UFOs, I would say that it would make more sense that they were multidimensional, rather than they were an advanced being traveling light years to visit planet Earth for various reasons, negative or positive. Because we know from our limited understanding of traveling in space that would be nearly impossible with the kind of understanding we have. That doesn't mean we can't build a spacecraft, a space station, that we don't need to deal with the kind of things that we're dealing with because we don't understand how the universe works. But still, probability-wise, multidimensionality beings makes more sense. So the other part of that, if that's true, I do feel that there are different races and species of what multidimensional beings are. I mean, that would just make more sense. I mean, if we're talking about a universe with vast existences beyond our limited understanding, why wouldn't there be energy beings, different structured beings that are living deep out in space, or different kind of planets? I mean, that would make more sense. And if they have figured out how to interdimensionally travel without, say, a ship, that to me makes more sense. I think when we see UFOs, I think that like in what you said in your question, that they're so advanced, they're masking this experience like to just walk out of the clouds, right? And people have seen this, right? People have seen, something just appear in their bedroom or appear in the woods, right? Or I've heard people, I've interviewed people about Bigfoot, right? Like Bigfoot just walks through out of like a portal or something. But I think if something's trying to interact, landing with a ship makes more sense than to the human than if they just appeared. I think that allows the human to understand what they understand on this planet. And then I think a lot of unidentified objects are top secret military stuff as well. I think that the most compelling stuff with extraterrestrial beings is this kind of interdimensional travel, this communication that they have that's beyond our understanding of what we do here in third dimensional reality.
No, absolutely. I mean, do you think there's connections to the oceans as well? We always hear about these things being seen coming in and out of the ocean, and whether it's a underwater base or maybe, like you said, if it's dimensional or portal traveling, are the portals under the ocean so that they're hidden away? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, the ocean. We don't even know what's at the bottom of the ocean. I mean, I think I was trying to think of a percentage. The last percentage I read that we know what's actually at the bottom of the ocean. I mean, maybe 30%. We figured out what's mapped at the bottom of the ocean.
Yeah.
I mean, if I was an alien species and I wanted to create a portal of which humans could barely find out where it was, I mean, I would definitely put it down there for sure. For sure.
Yeah. And you mentioned there as well, you mentioned that you think some of it could be secret black technology. Do you think that even if that is the case, that it's still based on some kind of reverse engineering from maybe some kind of crash retrieval program? Do you think that's, something that we could have sort of cracked over time?
I think so. I think that there's definitely I mean, the reason why History Channel keeps bringing up the Nazis is because there's a moment in time, and everybody will talk about this, where we were right here with technology, and then we were here, and everybody wants to know, how did that happen? Of course, there's lots of stories of the Nazis being in touch with aliens, but also the United States government around the same time. So what happened to our consciousness? Not everybody was building rockets, right? Yeah. And I'm not talking about war vehicles. I'm talking about actual being able to understand. I mean, I keep saying the universe, space, and time, but really understanding how to function at a higher level. And it wasn't everybody. It was just all of a sudden like two groups of people had this technology. And I think that time period is pretty debatable of where did they get that from? Who or what was communicating with us? And I think that is definitely a probability in our past, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So out of all of the kind of cases that you've sort of investigated or looked into over the years, do you have a favorite case? Is the one that always stands out that you would, always want to talk about more than any others?
Man, that's a hard one. One case. Oh man, you put me on the spot.
It's a tough one. It happens to me all the time, and I always.
It's so hard. I'm so hard. I'm like, no, not that one. Wait, there's got to be a better one that I've been talking about. I think. I mean, overall, as a case, like as a big case, I think Hudson Valley. I didn't realize Hudson Valley was that big of a deal until they're like, Melissa, would you be interested in researching and investigating this show? And I said, sure. And so I spent like a couple weeks before we started, Ben and I started looking at what we would want the show to be. And I started diving into how much weird stuff has been happening there. And I had no idea. I mean, I think of places like New Mexico and United States, and there's some places in other parts of Europe that are really, really active. But for some reason, the Hudson Valley right outside New York City is this hotbed of not only strange geological structures, interesting animal populations that don't necessarily grow in other parts of not only the North America, but some other parts of the world. And all of the UFO cases in like strange amounts of flaps. So like the 80s had a flap where for a couple of years, there was like over 5,000 cases that's just MUFON. I mean, there's other people that are reporting to the police department and like all sorts of stuff, like ships, weird alien creatures, people being abducted, like everything, cryptids, anything you can think of is happening. And then it was quiet, and they would pick up again, like late 90s. You have another flap. There's like millions of people being affected. and it just boggled my mind because I couldn't, what is going on here? We interviewed all sorts of different people. So it wasn't one kind of people. We had a theory with the DNA with Rh negative, and we did test a lot of people. 50% of the people that had experience did have Rh negative. But I don't think aliens would be targeting Rh negative people only in Hudson Valley. There has to be something else. And that I haven't figured out yet, but it's just so odd. You're not too far from New York City, which is huge.
Yeah.
And you've got all this crazy amount of activity. I mean, this is where Whitley Strieber had his experience, where he was abducted multiple times in his cabin. The author of The Visitors, who was the first person to sketch what a gray alien looked like.
Yeah, great answer. I think that's an absolutely fascinating case as well. And I think it does get talked about, but then it kind of just seems to disappear from the conversation for a while and then sort of crops back up here and there. So yeah. Wonderful. Then before I let you go, I just wondered if you could just talk about the Cosmic Cantina, because I think it's wonderful. Yes. I think it's fantastic.
Cosmic Cantina. So Cosmic Cantina is my podcast with two sci-fi writers, Josh Goldenbesky, Matt O'Connor. Matt O'Connor's from Australia. Josh is from the East Coast, Massachusetts. He's really rough. Josh is a total believer. Like, suck me up in the ship, I'm in. Matt is a skeptic, and I'm right in the middle, so it makes for good commentary. We are we do say inappropriate things, but we really love the space, and we've all been exploring it. But we also like to enjoy kind of joking around about it, not because it's a jokey subject. I think it's a very serious subject, but you got to have a little fun. I mean, that's why we all got into this, to like be kids again, to go out and be the Goonies and explore and figure out what the unknown is. And so we have a little bit of fun, and, being the only girl, I try to keep up with them, but I can't tell as many dick jokes. Sorry.
But no, it is. And I love that lightheartedness about it, because, like you said, it is a serious subject, but if you were serious about it all the time, I think we'd all just be driven crazy by it. So it is that just nice little getaway from the everyday intenseness of it. But yeah, I'll pop the link for that in the description, and I'll implore people to go and check it out. So
yes, please. We have a lot of fun.
Yeah. So I suppose the last question is, are there any future projects that you are either working on or that you're about to start, and anything you can tell us would be great?
Oh, awesome. I'm just finishing up a documentary that should be out either end of this year or beginning of next year. It's the largest meditation study that's been happening in the world. It's a little bit of tangent from aliens. However, it's really interesting because it's all science-based. So instead of people talking about how they feel good, they're really showing how cellular structures change when you are able to focus your thoughts. They show how the cell completely changes into a different cell, like in a different person's body. It's amazing. So that's coming out. So that's cool, if you want to check that out. And then I'm just starting a project with a new discovery, that a new ancient structure that's been discovered in Turkey. I can't talk about it too much, but it's pretty fascinating. The person who's kind of heading it up, the archaeologists and the person involved, they think that they found almost like a new civilization, a new beginning of a religion. So it could be pretty fascinating.
Wow, that's very interesting. So I look forward to seeing that when it materializes. Well, listen, Melissa, thank you so much for spending some time with me today. It's been absolutely wonderful. Again, I will implore everybody go and check out Code 12. Check out all of the links in the description for Melissa. And that's wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Vinny.
No problem. Thank you to everyone for watching. As always, please like, comment, share this video with everyone, and subscribe. And I'll see you again soon. Take care.